We look at burnout often as like the hours we work, like too many hours. That certainly was the case for me. But when I was home, I wasn't present. I was thinking about business. I was thinking about, so even when I wasn't at work, I was consumed with how do we launch this new product or how do we scale? Because we had finally hit this kind of momentum in the company where the brand had become a national brand and was making an impact. We were 6 years in business and we were really seeing some amazing outcomes. But then internally, I was just way consumed with it and was not, and balance is not a word I use anymore. Because I think it's a myth. But even if you're 70, 80% of your time needs to be in your business, that 20 or 30% when you need to be home and present should be home and present and not in your business. So I was 110% in my business, I think, with my time.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
All right, Team PYP, Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to the Play Your Position podcast. I am thrilled that you have decided to join me today because it's game day here at PYP. And you know what that means. I've got an amazing guest suited up, ready to take the field and into his leadership journey, which is unique to him. And he's got some great tips and stories to share with us today. You're going to walk away feeling rejuvenated and inspired and definitely more positive. His name is Aaron Marcum, and he's coming to us from the beautiful state of Idaho. Aaron, are you ready for kickoff?
I am ready. Let's do this. I'm excited.
Yeah. I am so excited to speak with you today. So team, here are some things I know about Aaron. He has founded and scaled several multi-million-dollar businesses. In 2015, however, he found himself having reached financial success, but was burned out and struggling to find sustainable happiness. From that point on, Aaron decided to make a drastic change. And these changes that he's made have propelled his success, including finishing a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and studying under Dr. Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology. Combining his entrepreneurial expertise with his unique positive psychology background, he has developed the Entrepreneur's 8 Laws to eliminate unhealthy stress, flourish personally, and create the good life, all in caps, which, boy, we want to hear more about that for sure. He's got a book coming out in early 2024. By the time this airs, it will be available. It's called EntreThrive. And this book specializes in helping entrepreneurs achieve happy, satisfying, and meaningful lives through their keynotes, EntreCircle Master Learning Forums, and courses. So Aaron, you have got a storied career here. You've founded companies. You've written a book, it's coming out soon. You have a master's in positive psychology, but somewhere along the line, you got the call to leadership. And I would love for you to share that story with us to set the stage. How old were you? What was going on in your life as you remember it? And then connect the dots between where you are today and that answering that first call and how that's played a role in your success.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that is a wonderful question. And I had to really kind of pull back and say it really didn't start when I became an entrepreneur. That came later. My call to leadership was at the age of 19. I actually served a 2-year mission for my church. And through that experience, towards the end of that experience, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, of all places, and I love the South because of spending 2 years down in the South. But I was called into a leadership position early on that 2-year stint, and I think it was because the leader of that mission saw in me this kind of not just drive, but compassion.
Mm.
I've always felt like I'm more of a compassionate leader. Hence, I got into home care, a more compassionate industry, and so I was called into this leadership, and then led. Eventually, I was one of two missionaries of about 150, all about my age, that led the entire mission. And I think that was my first call, honestly, to leadership. I mean, literally called to that. And then over the course, I had a family. I have 6 kids.
Yeah.
I started my first venture when I was 28. It was an
Okay.
in-home care agency, like I mentioned before. And that was kind of I think my second or third call. Like when I was in corporate America, I led teams. I kind of leaned into my leadership. Just kind of came natural for me. And then again, being an entrepreneur and starting a home care agency where I had to lead nurses and aides and a team of care coordinators, as we grew that company, really started leaning into my leadership traits. And then my story kind of evolved from there. Halfway through that journey, I saw the need for analytics and
Mm.
benchmarks and measuring satisfaction among those who are receiving care, like the seniors themselves and the family members
Yeah,
who are involved with that. And I know you're kind of going through that
I
yourself right
am.
now, but wanted to create benchmarks for an entire industry, which for me was stepping way into an uncomfortable part of leadership
Yeah.
that I had never experienced before. Because in home care, I was doing things that other people had already done, and I could follow these templates and follow this kind of way of running an in-home care business. It was all out there. It was had been established. Well, I had leaned into something just new, no one had ever done before. It was
Hmm.
a program, services that weren't even being offered for the entire industry yet. And so that took quite a bit of leadership. At first, I felt like I was pushing the string, trying to get
Yeah.
people to understand why they should measure these things.
Yeah.
But long story short, over time grew that company to be a very well-known brand in the in-home care space, national North America brand that changed the entire kind of landscape for the industry, raised these benchmarks, and now that brand works with over 4,000 home care providers and helping them
Wow.
improve quality of care.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty amazing to see. It's become quite an impactful uh, company. But through all that, and I worked with entrepreneurs, burned out entrepreneurs. And
Hmm.
you mentioned in 2015, I had kind of gotten to that point myself with that company. And what had got me there was this obsessive passion that was not super healthy. I
Yeah.
felt so called and so like wanting to make that impact that I was not taking care of my own well-being. And
Yeah.
that's when I
Oh,
kind of turned things around. Yeah.
that is so interesting that you bring that. And I don't think anybody's ever said that they recognized they were being so called.
Yeah.
Like you probably were saying yes way too often.
Yes.
At the
Yes,
expense
I
of,
was.
yeah, at the expense of yourself. And I'm curious, before you go on to this next chapter of your life, which I know you've just set up, what made you choose the home care industry? Did you have an experience with an aging parent or a grandparent that you
Mhm.
witnessed and said, we can do better? I mean, what drew you to that industry of all the ones you could have picked?
Yeah. I've always been close to my grandparents, and I
Okay.
think maybe that's
Yeah.
probably where I started is that I just gravitated to them in my early on in my life. My real big introduction to working with seniors, though, was in college. My wife had a job of working, it was elder hostel programs where
Hmm.
healthy seniors come into a university and then you take them around and tour. And I was the driver often on these
Oh,
field trips.
fun.
And so I just got to know them. Plus, my wife is very musically talented. And so we would
Okay.
go into senior homes, even when we were dating. And I'd never been a great singer, but I would at least, they don't care when you're in a senior home. And so we'd sing and she'd play the piano. And so that was fun. And so that was my first intro. And then I had an entrepreneur class in college, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, what an opportunity as well to serve this population. And so I hadn't identified in starting an in-home care company until about 5 years after I graduated, though. I went into corporate America, into the telecom industry and sales.
Sure.
And that was I decided I didn't love corporate America. I knew I was going to do my own thing. I just had to have the financial resources to do it. And
Yeah.
I landed on in-home care. I went to an article on entrepreneur.com and saw that it was a growing industry. I love seniors. I already knew I loved that I
Love
thought I was going to start
that.
a hearing aid company is what I was really moving forward on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then pivoted the last few months of when I was ready to launch. And it's been a
Yeah.
wonderful journey for me.
Oh, well, it sounds like it. However, you did reach a point in 2015. Now let's get back to this part of the story where
Yeah.
you had just given too much of yourself and you were experiencing burnout. Could you describe some of the symptoms that you noticed in yourself? Because I know there are listeners who either are dealing with that themselves or know people and perhaps want to guide them towards some solutions. And then that will lead us into you getting your master's and such.
Yeah. Yeah. So around that time, I had become disconnected, probably for about 3 years, become quite disconnected from what I call my guiding truths. I'd had them
Mm.
for quite a while. I actually established them way back. I took eMyth Revisited when I had my home care agency, the mastery program, and created what he calls the primary aim. I later adopted them as my guiding truths. And I had become disconnected. They actually had been sitting on my wall that entire time, but I just really had become disconnected to where, like, my guiding truths, there are 8 of them. My mind is at peace. My family
Mm.
receives of my time. My life is filled with abundance. And I had gotten to a point with my company to where a lot of those things were just not true about me.
Hmm.
I was not only the hour, like we look at burnout often as like the hours we work, like too many hours. That certainly was the case for me. But when I was home, I wasn't present. I was
Oh,
thinking about
yeah.
business. I was thinking about, so even when I wasn't at work, I was consumed with how do we launch this new product or how do we scale? Because we had finally hit this kind of momentum in the company where the brand had become a national brand and was making an impact. We were 6 years in business and we were really seeing some amazing outcomes. But then internally, I was just way consumed with it and was not. And balance is not a word I use anymore.
No.
And, because I think it's a myth. But even if you're 70, 80% of your time needs to be in your business, that 20 or 30% when you need to be home and present should be home and present and not in your business. So I was 110% in my business, I
Yeah.
think, with my time.
Yeah.
And so those were some of the symptoms. My health, I was not exercising. I was not engaged in activity. I was at my desk a lot. I
Yeah.
was getting some back pain, some physical symptoms that were manifesting themselves. For my size and what I typically had been before. For myself, I was overweight and just not
Hmm.
healthy.
Yeah.
So it took some conversations with some mentors and some one in particular. He has since passed away. I actually mentioned him in the book, Dale Green, Dale is all into fitness, and he was at 4 a.m. I'd get pictures from Dale on my phone saying, "Where are you?" At the
Get
gym.
out here. Come on,
Yeah,
Aaron. What are you
yeah,
doing?
and
Get
he
out
did it
of
with such
bed.
love, as well. And so, people like that, I started surrounding myself with the right people who were just there who sincerely wanted me to live a better life. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
So you recognize that you had enough awareness to say this can't continue, and you then decided to pursue a new path
yeah.
into the world of positive psychology. So let's talk about how that is influencing the work you're doing now and the book you've just written.
Yeah. So I didn't pursue that master's degree until I was 40. In fact, I just completed it last year.
Oh, wow. Oh,
2022.
so it's
Yeah.
recent.
Yeah,
Okay.
fairly recent. It's all
Yeah.
really fresh. But my journey to positive psychology started in 2017. I read the book The Happiness Advantage by Sean Acor, a
Yep.
positive psychologist out of Harvard. And
Yes.
he introduced me that book to Dr. Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, former professor of mine there at UPenn, and
Right.
all of his work. And so I became a fan. Like I just started absorbing this new field even back then. And because of my responsibilities as CEO and so forth at my company, and I had a couple other ventures I was involved in as well, that I just couldn't do a program like that. Flying out to Pennsylvania once a month for a week was just not doable. And then COVID hit
Right.
and they went virtual.
Mm.
And so I was able to do the program. It was an amazing experience virtually, all live, all live. But and just watching how they pivoted to a virtual environment was impressive.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was a transformational program for me. So many people I learned from, not just from the famous people who came in, who were experts in the field of positive psychology. Angela Duckworth was a
Sure.
lecturer,
Grit.
from Grit, and
Yep.
yeah, and many others that just had a profound impact. Of course, Marty, Dr. Seligman, who has always been a profound impact on me since I started this journey. But from that, the reason I did the program, and this is, I think, really important, is I was fascinated because I've been studying it for about 4 years up until I submitted my application to go into the program, 4 or 5 years. Is I was fascinated with why some entrepreneurs thrive and why some don't. And that's positive psychology in a nutshell, is why do some people thrive and why do some people don't? It's the science of well-being. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of people like positive psychology. Is that like how to be happier? And yeah, there's some elements to that, but it's really about why do some people thrive and why do some people don't, and all the science behind it. You'd be blown away by how many studies have been done
Mm.
on well-being, and a lot of them are positive psychologists who've done that research. Angela Duckworth being one of them, of course. But I was fascinated with this. My capstone, my thesis was focused on it. And so the whole time as I'm learning and absorbing that information, I'm thinking about the entrepreneur,
Right.
myself, my own target market.
Yeah.
How can I help them? How can I build programs that would be catered to them? And that's been my journey ever since with EntreThrive and the book and launching some coaching programs around helping these entrepreneurs. I've been coaching entrepreneurs for 20 years,
Sure.
but a lot in the healthcare space.
Yeah.
But the
Ooh, which
last
is a
years I've
tough
been branching from
space
that. It is a tough space, and
because
talk
there's
about a space of burnout, right? So
big time. Oh, and
yeah,
then you put a pandemic on top of it, and it's just been a dumpster fire for so many people, and
yeah,
good
yeah,
people who want, who are still to this day doing what you are doing. They're being called too much, and they don't
yeah,
know how to set up those boundaries, and maybe even take a step back and ask themselves some of the questions that we all need to regularly. Like, is this what I really want?
hmm,
Where am I not showing up for myself, for
yeah,
others, all those kinds of things. So why don't you take us into, I know listeners would love to hear the 8 laws that you've
yeah,
identified and how those laws can apply to all of us. Because yes, entrepreneurs are a special breed. And yet I think in a way, all of us are entrepreneurial, at least in our own lives, that we have to actively participate in our lives and
yeah.
build a life. It's not just something that's given to us or we just kind of get on an assembly line and follow a path. Those days are gone. Thank goodness.
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, right? Like
Right.
go to school, get your degree, get a job, work that job your whole life, like my father did, retire with a pension, and then sail off into the sunset. There may still be some of those lingering, but you and I both know most of that is gone.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And the more that we can, it's probably a whole other topic about, specializing and really leaning into what you want. Like it's okay to want what you want.
Oh,
And
thank you. Can you say that again?
it's okay to want what you want. I
Yes.
actually that's borrowed, I guess you could say, from Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach, which I've been involved in for 15 years. He wrote the book 10x is easier than 2x with
Yes.
Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and so that's it's really okay to want what you want, and I've learned in my own life when it comes to positive psychology and the 8 laws is that's where we start. The first law is EntreClarity. I use the word entre because these laws are for entrepreneurs, but also if you read it, in fact, I just received an email from someone who's endorsing the book, who is a entrepreneur, but she kind of she was given the post of CEO over quite a large organization,
Mm-hmm.
but she has a very much an entrepreneur mind. It's not like she started the company, but I've worked with her. I've coached her and her team for this last year, and very entrepreneurial. So you're right. It doesn't like these laws apply in our lives in so many aspects, personal and professional. So the first one, EntreClarity, and
Right.
that's I talked about the guiding truths, and I break up in the book. It was a way for me to write a better, more organized book, is I broke it up in this crawl, walk, run, fly approach.
Ooh, I
I
like
get that
that.
from the famous quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, where he says, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving forward.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, wonderful quote. And so I use that kind of framework for every one of the laws. And so with EntreClarity, the crawl part is the guiding truths. Like, find out what's really important to you. What do you want?
Yes.
Not what
Yes.
your business wants. So often we are driven, we're like, as entrepreneurs, we think that we're here to serve our business. It's actually prevalent out there in the business world. Like we're here to
Yeah.
serve our business rather than our business is here to serve us
Yeah.
and what we want. And so by getting true on your guiding truths, not your company's guiding truths, on your guiding truths, and I walked them through kind of how to do that. And we actually have a great tool for your listeners that we'll share at the end that they can download that
Great.
help get to their guiding truths. And then, another part of that is I use the term breakaways. I'm a cyclist.
Mm-hmm.
I loved, in 2016 is when I first started that journey. And so I use the term breakaway. It's in the Tour de France, for riders to break away, they need a strong team, and a breakaway allows them to get closer to the bigger goal. So I
Sure.
talk about these breakaways in those chapters, like what's your next breakaway to get to your bigger goal? Because we have to start small. We have to start somewhere. And so that's
Sure.
EntreClarity. The second law of the 8 is EntreCreate. And if we as entrepreneurs and really as human beings, if we're not creating, if we're not working on things that tap into our creative genius, and we're always working in the business or working in our job, then our life satisfaction, our well-being, especially our deeper well-being of living a fulfilled life is limited.
Mm-hmm.
Creativity is key to well-being. There's a lot of research, and I cite some of that in the book
Mm-hmm.
about creativity and finding time and space to create. So I use this term deep thrive sessions that I've been doing for a few years, where I spend time every week going deep into a topic, something I want to learn about that sometimes doesn't have anything to do with my business. Often I find a way to apply it, but
Yeah.
initially it's
Right.
not the reason I'm reading it or diving into it. But deep thrive sessions are my creative periods where I try to create. And so creation, super important, go more deep into that. And then the third one, and we talk about Angela Duckworth, but it's EntreGrit. And she
Nice.
inspired that one in her work. But EntreGrit is all about the entrepreneur. And we've talked about this term calling. And Angela in her research, she's done a really good job of framing calling versus passion,
Yes.
and that calling is a deeper sense of why and a deeper sense of impact, and so
Yeah.
your staying power and your grittiness is deeper. So I've identified not just with those two, but I have these 5 levels of grit for an entrepreneur. It starts with curiosity. Like when we first get curious about something, that's really what kind of lights the fire. And then interest keeps the fire going. Is like interest is the second level. And that's when we do the research and we start we create our LLC, and we start going deeper into building out this venture. And the third level is practice.
Nice.
And practice is one that, especially for younger entrepreneurs, those who are just starting a business, they want to skip practice a little.
Yes, they do. You can't.
They want that passion just to kind of fall into their laps without the work that's necessary to lean into the passion.
Yeah.
And the passion's the fourth one, but we can't skip the practice. Like practice sometimes could take a few months. Sometimes it can take a couple years. Now there's a time if you practice, you felt like you've done enough practice and you just haven't gotten to the passion part, it's probably time to move on.
Right. That's a sign, right?
Yeah, that's a sign.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then passion is more internal. It's more of our personal why. It's not selfish. I make that point in the book, but it is more about you. It's more about what's really important to me. What am I passionate about?
Yeah. And
the fifth one, the one that takes us deeper into grit and really helps us have that staying power is calling. So you go from passion to calling. And the fourth level, passion that's where we can get really obsessively passionate about things. We can even do that in calling, as I mentioned before. But the goal, when you feel called to something, is start thinking about the impact you're not only going to have on your customers and your employees, but the impact you're going to have on your family.
Yeah.
The impact you're going to have on your significant other with this business, and how you can create alignment between the two, between your personal and professional life. And as long as you keep that in check, calling is a wonderful place to be.
Yes, it is.
In an entrepreneur's journey. I feel that now in what I'm doing.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
And it comes through. I mean, I really feel it from you, Aaron. And I know listeners can't see you, but you have a broad, bright smile. Your body language is calm and centered. And there's this sense about you that you're exactly where you not only need to be, but ultimately want to be. And that's, I think today, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Yeah, I think today that's kind of the holy grail a lot of people are chasing, is they're looking for it's. You said something earlier that, again, is so important to reiterate, that work-life balance is a myth. There is no such thing. Balance, if you look at, I'd say to people all the time, go outside into the woods or a park where there's a bunch of trees, and you tell me if you find one tree that is perfectly balanced, and then take a picture of it and show me, and I will eat my words. Balance doesn't exist in nature. No. It just doesn't.
I love that example. We cut down our Christmas tree every year, and it's always like a Charlie Brown tree.
Yeah, it's lopsided. The trunk is curved. One side branches are longer than the other. I mean, it.
That's life.
There's
That's
beauty. Us. Our faces are not balanced. Like when you look at a photograph of a face,
I have a crooked nose.
I have one eye's a little bit smaller when I smile. And the technology has created this false sense of needing things needing to be symmetrical, to the point where people are going into plastic surgeons and saying, I want you to make my face symmetrical. It does not look normal. That our human brain responds, recoils from that, which is why all these filters and all these things is why the conversation around perhaps we need to be a little bit more cautious about what we just unleash to everybody. You know, as
Yeah.
adults, we can make judicious decisions. And I'm sure that's part of the work that you do when you're coaching entrepreneurs who might be a little bit out of alignment in
Yeah.
one of these.
Yeah.
Okay, I know there's 5 other laws, but let's say readers can get your book and read those.
Yeah.
I love the ones you shared, especially this 5
please.
levels of
Yeah.
grit. Right?
Those are the 3 foundational ones
Love
too.
it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
well, there's 4. There's interconnections, which is relationships, which is the 4th one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I looked up the word entre with the meaning of that. And it's the act or manner of entering an entrance and also freedom of entry or access. So it's so cool when you think about putting it in front of like entre grit. You're accessing grit. And then there's those 5 layers that you just described.
Yeah.
You know, people who are listening it's 2024. When people are listening to this, it's 2024. And it's a brand new year. It looks like the pandemic is definitely behind us now. But there's a lot of lingering issues related to the pandemic.
Sure.
In your work with positive psychology and teaching people, particularly entrepreneurs, about good business practices and building and scaling and all that, what's 1 or 2 common blocks that people show up to you with that you have to untangle them from, as far as getting them to get moving forward?
You know, I think I don't know if it's number 1, but it's one that shows up consistently is blame and shame.
Ooh.
You know, and the reason I share them together is that they can both happen in the same sentence sometimes. is that we sometimes we blame others or team members or whatever because we're ashamed of our own inadequacies or our own insecurities, and it's our defensive mechanism. And so with leaders, because that's who I work with. I mean, I work 100% with leaders, entrepreneurial leaders, and leadership teams. I do a lot of work with leadership teams as well, and it's really prevalent when it comes to some of that blame and deflection, and it just creates an unhealthy team. And then there's, Patrick Lencioni, says the number 1 dysfunction of a team is the absence of trust.
Yeah.
And so those shame and blame and so forth, they create that absence of trust. Is that and then it just from there, as Patrick Lencioni says, is it just kind of unravels from there, because that's the foundational thing is trust with any team, with any relationship. I talk about that with even personal relationships in the book when it comes to interconnections, is that usually and often, if you really pull back the layers, these leaders, they're not unable to show up for their team at work because of what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that's why I've been so fascinated. Like, I'll be working with a leadership team on how to better run their business. This is coaching I've done for years, and on the operational business side and the vision side. And I have learned to pull them aside and say, wait a second, what's going on here? Because that discussion we just had with your leadership team was not healthy. And it's often because they're struggling at home, they're struggling with their relationships. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It does. And I think blame and shame, blame tends to be external, and shame tends to be internal. We turn it inwards. We feel ashamed, and therefore we blame others because it's too hard to look at ourselves.
Yeah.
And
exactly right.
That is, I think, part of the journey that we're all on, is getting to a point. At some point, you have to face yourself out on the battlefield. I mean, it's you and nobody else. I know Brene Brown made Theodore Roosevelt's poem about the man in the arena famous, but that sentiment in that poem is, it's interesting. There's no coincidence that her work has become as prevalent and popular as it has in a time when the internet has fundamentally changed everything for all of us, in how we connect, in the kinds of things we can see. As I think it was Thomas Friedman who wrote the book, The World Is Now Flat. We can know what's going on in a small town in Belgium today in a way that even a generation or two ago, nobody knew.
Yeah.
So it's almost like everybody's business is everybody's business. And that brings forth a lot of challenges, as does the pressure I think entrepreneurs and leaders put on. We all put them on ourselves because we have
Yeah.
such high expectations to succeed. And
Yeah.
we know that it's not just about us anymore, that there are people counting on us. And when we're feeling not our best, or we just had a fight at home, or one of our kids is in trouble, that can bring up a lot of shame and disconnection and wanting to just, I'm sure you see it all the escapism that's
Yeah.
available for people to avoid what they really need to do is sit down and say, what am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it's too is that not just as entrepreneurs, but as human beings, if we look at things or setbacks or the way we treated somebody or a relationship as permanent, then we are overwhelmed with like, I can't change the outcome here. And I think
Yeah.
especially for entrepreneurs is that if we have the mindset that nothing's permanent for the most part. I mean, there are some things that's like COVID. You mentioned COVID, is that's a temporary setback that we just have to lean into and look at it as temporary. And how do we, what changes do we need to make going forward without looking at our past as some like, yeah, maybe we've made some mistakes or maybe we didn't do something just right. But if we put shame, the label of shame on our past and frame it that way, then moving forward is almost impossible.
It is.
So I would say, and that's the other thing that I try to coach entrepreneurs on is that like, yeah, that happened and we need to be aware of that, but that self-acceptance of who you are today,
Mhm.
and being okay with who you are today, knowing that you're going to create a better and brighter future as you move forward is really, really important. I mentioned Dan Sullivan. I guess, he's one of my favorites. He's been a coach of mine for years, but he wrote The Gap and the Gain, and the more we're in the gain, and he's been teaching that concept for years, about being in the gain, like measuring from where you started to where you ended up.
Yeah.
And too often as entrepreneurs, we measure from where we thought we should be to where we ended
Yes.
up. And then we get into this gap, that's called the gap. And that's depression and not being grateful and all those yucky feelings come with that when we're in the gap. But if we can stay in the gain, and again, this is Dan's work, not mine, but this is very
It's
much
good to
positive
hear it,
psychology
but it's
work.
good to hear it. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
applicable to what you do, Aaron.
yeah,
And I'm sure there are listeners who've never heard this concept. So thank you for,
yeah. You
bringing it
bet.
up. And yeah, I know I have found myself in that gap. I think anybody who's, again, ambitious and was raised with perhaps leadership as an expectation, parents, whether you might have been in scouts or like you were in your faith, in your church, your mission work, and it's about serving, servant leadership, right? And when we feel like we've fallen short from, perhaps we put a big goal on the wall and we didn't hit it by the time we said we would. I remember when I was in a company back in the 2000s, one of my coaches would say, it's okay. He goes, he would admit in front of the room, I rarely hit my goal on the date that I say I will, but I always hit my goal
Mhm.
because I don't give up, and that always stayed with me because I was like, sometimes be like, well, I didn't hit it. So now I have to come up with a new one instead of just
Yeah,
extending the day, right?
yeah.
Maybe I need two
Giving
more
yourself some
months.
grace.
Yeah, that's a big
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
That's a big
And it's
one.
the trap that many entrepreneurs fall into,
Yeah,
humans fall into. I mean, everyone. Like we can put our kids in that where well, you should have done this. You should have gotten to this point. You should have cleaned your room by this time during the day. And they maybe took an extra couple hours, and so we
right.
can do the same thing to our kids. And so I don't know. It's living in that kind of gratitude. And I don't, and again, I appreciate your compliments of me, but I do this so imperfectly. I have 6 kids. And so
What's the
it's
age range?
Age range is 14 to 20. He'll be 26 here this month. So
okay. So you still got
three
teenagers
boys,
around.
3 girls. Yeah. So they're wonderful. And I have to constantly remind myself, I'm not a perfect father. I never would ever try to promote myself as such. But we can fall prey, like you said, social media and everything, of painting this picture. We hear this all the time, and paint this kind of lovely picture of ourselves. And I'm guilty of that. If you look at my social media, it's I have team members who post for me, and it makes it look, great. But internally, every day we're having to. Every day you have to reset your mind,
You
and
do.
every day there's mistakes, things that happen, and I may have been short with one of my kids, but we have to stay in that gain mindset. And I call in the book the good life mindset, to say, you know what, I may have fallen short here, but the complete life, which is what Aristotle talked about,
Yes.
the good life is not a perfect life. It's a life of finding ways to thrive regardless of circumstance, regardless of what might be going on around us. And so much of that is the good life mindset. We just have to have that or try to get there as much as possible.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, your book sounds amazing. So team, obviously this book will be available. There'll be a link to get it on Aaron's show notes page at pyppodcast.com, along with where he hangs out. So why don't you tell us, Aaron, where are you online? Do you have a website? You were talking about an assessment or a way to that Team PYP could access. You said something, and I apologize. There was
it's the EntreClarity Guide.
That's it.
And if you go to EntreThrive.com/PYP, we've actually created a unique URL for your listeners. So EntreThrive.com/PYP, they can download that free EntreClarity tool. It's 2 parts. It has the guiding truths, and it actually has a breakaway tool.
Oh, nice.
And we haven't had time to talk about the catalytic mechanism that's part of that tool. That's a Jim Collins term from years gone by, not long before, but before Good to Great, where he wrote that book. But powerful tool. I hope.
Well, what is it? Describe it for us quickly.
A catalytic mechanism is something you put in place to almost ensure achievement of a breakaway or that little goal or whatever you're trying to accomplish. For example, if I have a history of canceling at the last minute of family vacation because of work responsibilities, the catalytic mechanism would be for me to book travel that's non-refundable, or I don't get my money back.
Love
and so
it.
You're doing something that's a little painful or a lot painful in order to get it done. I do this in my racing when it comes to biking and cycling. So I
tell us about that race you do every year. How many miles is it?
It's 206 miles to be exact.
Wow.
And it's over 4 mountain ranges. It's called Lodajah. It's Logan, Utah to Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Okay.
And it's in September every year. I've completed it 4 times. Tried it 5 times. One year I hit a wall and I couldn't quite complete it. And I talk more about in the book the power of drafting when it comes to your connections and all these. I mean, there is so many wonderful entrepreneurial analogies in the world of cycling. But yeah, that's I'm going to do it this next year. I have some breakaways I'm putting in place so that I can get my best time in September of 2024. So.
Well, congratulations. That's a race I've never heard of. I'm not in the cycling world the way obviously you are. I'd like to ride my bike.
Yeah, good. Well, that's a start.
And I ride a mountain bike, and I'm sure you're riding a road bike with the very thin tires and everything aerodynamic, right? And but the drafting, that was a term that I learned very early on, because my dad liked to ride bikes, not like you, but just I learned from him just terms. And also like in sailing, it's the same thing. You can you position yourself in such a way that you're not working as hard, but you're still gaining at a rate that you would if you were working so hard, right?
Yeah. Drafting's about 1/3 of your energy is saved by tapping into drafting and sharing that draft,
Right.
So with others.
Which is part of the power of working with a coach and a
Yes,
mastermind and the kind of work that you do now to help.
100%.
Yeah, and I sound like a broken record, but I encourage you listeners to take advantage of Aaron's offer, get his tools, get his book. You can learn something new from everybody, and
Yeah,
today you've definitely taken us into an excellent world, a world I love to be
thank
in.
you.
And I can't be in it all the time because I am human. And there are days when I lose faith in myself. And I know Team PYP is the same way, that sometimes you just hit a wall. And
Yeah.
it honestly, sometimes all it takes to snap out of it is to hear a conversation like this and remember we're all in this together. There are
Hmm.
tools readily available, and it is about adopting that different mindset. You call it the good life, and I love that. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
So
thank you. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
Aristotle came up with that, but I
hey,
just tagged onto the mindset. So trademarks weren't available back then.
you can't trademark something like that.
No,
There's
you
certain
can't.
you
And there's a
can't.
wonderful book called The Good Life that came out this year about the longest Harvard study in relationships. Highly recommend that
Good.
book. It,
That'll be one we put. What other books have been good?
yeah, so that one's by Robert Waldinger and Mark Schultz, and they are the program directors for that study right now. Another book I mentioned, 10X is Easier Than 2X, Dan
Yep.
Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. The one of my favorite all-time books. And then one that has been timeless for me that I've read many times and listened to the audio many times is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's it's one of my all times. And the 10X Easier Than 2X is a trilogy. So Who Not How and then Gap in the Gain are the other two books with that trilogy, and they work really well together.
Okay.
So
I'll make sure I make a shout out to the trilogy, because
yeah,
you're not the first one to recommend 10X Easier Than 2X, but you're the first one to talk about the trilogy. And
yeah,
Dan Sullivan is definitely a name that comes up regularly here on PYP. And I think it's because he's made such an impact on so many people who are
he
pursuing a
has.
path of entrepreneurship, leadership, making the world a better place,
Hmm.
which you are clearly doing,
Yeah.
Aaron.
People like Dan, they've just influenced me, Marty.
Yeah,
And I know Dan personally. I work with him he's my coach. So
that's
coaches have coaches.
awesome.
So yeah,
Yeah, coaches have to have coaches.
yeah,
I'm a firm believer in that.
yeah, yeah.
You got to walk your talk, you know?
That's right.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of this amazing conversation today, Aaron, what parting words of wisdom can you leave us all here with today?
I think that if where we start, obviously with getting clear on our why and our guiding truths, I think that, we have to, the crawl, walk, run, fly is let's not, it's too often we want to run as entrepreneurs because we're, what we call quick starts. A lot of us, we really jump in. You've probably taken the Colby, it sounds like.
Quick start.
Yeah, I'm a 9. I'm a 9 out of 10. But sometimes we have to go slow to go fast. And I
Yeah.
would say just really reconnect with those guiding truths, really find out what you want. And then decide, again, those 5 levels of grit, I think are really important as we work through our various ventures and what we're trying to do in life. So
Yeah. What do you want your leadership legacy to be?
my leadership legacy, I think, is a lot more personal than it is professional. Is I hope that I get emotional.
It's all good.
Yeah,
I do.
yeah.
I
Wow.
do too.
It came. Yeah, I wear it on my sleeve. But I hope that a leader, that my fatherly leadership is more prevalent than my professional leadership. I can't say that's the case today. I think that I get a lot of external accolades, and I'm trying to lean more into my fatherhood and being a better husband and being the leader I need to be for this team. My first team, which is my family.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Aaron, thank you so much for showing up today and giving us your best. This has been just a very uplifting conversation for me. And I know listeners are walking away just going, There it is. Again, thank you. It's all
This
so
has been
awesome.
fun. Thank you.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.